I was forced to leave behind the first real person I loved.
Pew 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 pew.
Thank you for not judging me, though.
Oh, have you seen me? I don't mind a fucking judge.
I've seen you. I've seen you a lot.
Well, good morning. How we doing? What's up, Bodegazilla? Sprinting and riding. How's the book coming along? Okay. $30K, uploaded on the 8th. Yeah, it's pretty rough. Okay. Let's get the day cracking on our final read of the book. Ba-da-bum-bum. Okay. Chapter 2, Death in Daylight. In the early morning, some days later, Or sat on a log by her campfire. Her fingers toyed with the crystal amulet around her neck as they often did when her thoughts were troubled. A few paces from the fire were two tents. One of them was hers, and between them they held three sleeping figures. A little clearing was tucked deep into the woods close by the town of Burlig. The trees had not yet cast off their greenery. Thanks, Bode, but merely traded it for red and gold. The morning sunlight fell in holland daffles across the ground, and Oris held her hand in the larger patches of it, letting the sun warm her blood. She had thrown just a bit of fresh-hewn pine into the fire. and its scent made her nostrils burn. Burned her nostrils in a pleasantly acrid way. The day was warm enough that the fire was not strictly necessary, but building it had kept Oris busy, and that was much needed. These woods were quiet, but they did not lend her thoughts any peace. Nothing did these days, nothing since Wellmont. She gave a little growl. Her fingers clutched harder at the crystal amulet. It was plain enough, carved in a shape like a pyramid with small notches at the base. Around the notches had been tied a thin leather thong to hang the amulet on her neck. And suddenly, as she clutched it ever more tightly, the crystal began to glow. Oris froze as light swelled in the crystal. It was bright white with just the faintest hint of blue. The light flashed still brighter. The crystal grew suddenly as hot as a poker from the hearth. Oris hissed with pain and dropped it before pulling the thong off from around her neck. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the light vanished. From the dark below, she muttered. Her gaze darted to the trees at the edge of the clearing. There was no sign of anyone there, yet now she could sense something. None of the usual sounds of bird or beast came to her. The forest was too quiet. Her blue vest lay on the ground next to her. She shrugged it over her broad shoulders before belting on her sword. Then she stole on Mouse's feet to one of the tents and pulled the flap open. There lay Flip on his back beside a nude Kara. Under Flip's golden shirt, his thin chest rose and fell with gentle snores. Kara had curled on her side, her arms wrapped around her tender frame. Oris leaned farther into the tent and clapped a hand over Flip's mouth. Cried Flip, thrashing under her hand. Shut it, said Oris. Flip recognized her and stilled. Oris lifted her hand. What's wrong, dear? Whispered the mage. Is your barrier broken? Flip frowned at her, then his eyes drifted west. It didn't break, but it isn't there anymore. What? Trouble, said Oris. Dress yourself and hurry. She withdrew from the tent and stole to the tree line, keeping watch. No danger presented itself, but the silence in the forest had deepened. Whatever was approaching, it was closer now. Morning, Erica. Back to using it on Monday. What are you using in the meantime? Hey, awesome, Erica. You have a good sprint, Bodegazola? Hey, 700 words isn't bad. For what, a 15-minute sprint? 10 minutes? What was it? What's for the words? Hmm, cool. Nice, Erica. Well, that seems smart, Bodegazilla. Okay. All right. So what we were doing was we read. I realized something that I wanted to add to a later scene. I went. I added it. Now we're going back to our read. Knock on wood, Bode. Suddenly, as she clutched ever more tightly the crystal, "What's wrong, dear?" whispered the mage. "Has your barrier broken?" Flip frowned at her, then his eyes drifted west. "It didn't break, but it isn't there anymore." "What?" "Trouble," said Oris. "Dress yourself and hurry." Oh, actually, you know what? There's another thing that I want to add. Atticus. Best bits of Scrivener and Vellum into one web-based program. I am suspicious. I've seen lots of people try and duplicate the best parts of Scrivener. No, but really, is it working out for you, Erica? Do you like it? Sweet. Well, good luck to him and you both. Hey, morning, Ari. I did finish a book. It comes out on October 1st. Boom. Oh, I should actually change that. There you go. Link to the new book. You can pre-order it on Amazon, or you can pre-order the hardcover directly from me, which is, I mean, let's face it, pretty much the coolest thing that you could do and would make you a superior human being, vastly overshadowing your fellow man. Slash woman slash envy. I really have to shed that phrase, but there's something so, and it's just pure nostalgia. There's no inherent value to the phrase, but there's something so powerful in my mind about the phrase "your fellow man." Like, it's just so oomph. You know what I mean? But that's literally just sheer nostalgia. It's the exact same mental impulse that makes us look back at a flawed book or movie or TV show and go, no, no, it's good actually. It's like it's not. You just like it because when you were 8 years old and you saw somebody do the truffle shuffle in theaters, it blew your fucking mind. It's not a good movie. Yes, I am getting oddly specific. Okay. Now Flip has a dagger of cancellation, which he should have because that was in the original script that I first wrote for this story 13 years ago. Well, you know, I've actually had a couple of people mention that, Ari. This book can totally be read on its own. It relies not at all on any of the previous books. Now, there are Easter eggs in here that if somebody's read all the previous books, they'll be like, oh, I recognize that person, or oh, this place, they went to the same place that those other people went to in that other book. But like, it's a bonus, you know what I mean? It's not a requirement by any means. Also, this book, it's really fucking good. Now, I'm a little biased, but oh man, I dropped a bullet list on Tumblr of all the reasons that this book is awesome. Here, let me read you the bullet list real quick. Womp womp. Womp womp. Here we go. This book has got everything. Disaster bisexuals, all of them, everywhere. Pining. Literally the best friendship. I love these fucking tools so much, but not half as much as they love each other. They're complete idiots. They're the best. Pining. Holy God. 3 damaged fools, each of whom thinks they're deeply worthless, each of whom realizes the others are incredible and never stops telling them so. Tall and small Herbo and her tiny feral girlfriend, and their twink BFF, who is composed of 17% absolute shit goblin and 86% hype for the two of them and 0% ability to math. There is so much pining. And, oh yeah, of course there's magic and sword fights and Destiny, and really, honestly, some of the most kick-ass fantasy action I think I've ever put to paper, but, like, the bullet list is what I really live for, so. I am proud of this description. Yes. I am an author. Yes, I am literally trying to tempt you. That's funny, Erica. Yeah, man, people shit on Tumblr, but I've gotten way more success off of Tumblr than any other social media platform. Okay. She withdrew from the tent and stole to the tree line, keeping watch. No danger presented itself, but the silence and the forest had deepened. Whatever was approaching, it was closer now. Soon Flip emerged from his tent. He trotted towards her, still buckling his trousers around his waist. Oris waited until he had almost reached her, and then she leaped up, snatched the lowest branch, and hauled herself hand over hand up the tree. With a sigh and a groan, Flip muttered an incantation. Light glowed in his eyes, and wind swept him upwards. He passed Oris almost at once. When she came to a stop next to him, he had already settled into a position of rest, leaning back against the trunk. "This is a great deal of fuss," said Flip. "What if it is only a bear?" "A bear did not bring down your spells," said Oris. "The wood is too quiet, and..." She fell silent, and Flip frowned at her. "And what?" Oris's fingers played with the crystal amulet. It was still cold, and nothing. He snorted. What about the lovers? They'll be fine, said Oris. No one touches lovers. Constables would drape their guts over 6 different kingdoms. Do you honestly think I'm a fool? Flip closed his eyes. If I answer, darling, do you promise not to fling me from this tree? Hey, what's up, Vale? Yeah, don't worry about it, Ari. I tempt people, but I don't push. Oris smiled and shook her head, turning her attention back to the clearing. The tent stood alone, undisturbed. The campfire burned merrily, sending up a steady stream of thin smoke. All seemed peaceful enough. And then 3 figures appeared from the trees to the north. Oris slapped Flip's leg. He opened his eyes, scowling at her. She pointed. The newcomers wore plain clothing with flashes of blue and gray. A uniform, wondered Oris? 2 of them were impressive-looking enough, but their leader was a giant. His skin was pale under a tan, and his ear-length hair was shaggy and thick. Several days of unkept beard hanged from his chin. Hanged? Yeah. Nope. Oh. Bloop. Several days of unkept beard hung from his chin. I was like, that's not the right use of hanged. They hanged his beard for beard crimes. Hung from his chin. Thick bands of muscle wrapped every part of him so that he looked like he was trying to burst out of his leathers. Oris was uncommonly tall and strong, but she guessed this man was 2 heads taller than her and mayhap 5 stone heavier. What noble folk are we honored to entertain today, I wonder, said Oris. No doubt the kindred or comrades of someone we've bedded or beheaded, said Flip. Oris rolled her eyes. Don't roll your eyes at me, said Flip, shoving her shoulder. Do not roll your eyes at me when you know I speak only the truth. Because something is true does not mean it's pleasant to hear, said Oris. Often it's the opposite. Well, let's not jump to conclusions, said Flip. We don't know they're after us. The soldiers crossed the clearing. The leader looked at the other 2 and pointed to the tents. Slowly, to muffle the noise, all 3 of them drew weapons and crept quietly forwards. Each of the soldiers wielded a broad blade. Their leader gripped a massive axe. Its haft was a pace and a half long. Handle is the word I'm looking for. Its handle was a pace and a half long, and its head was 2 handbreadths wide. All right, so they're after us, said Flip. The leader took position between both tents to prevent escape. The soldiers readied themselves to dive within. All 3 of the soldiers drew weapons and crept quietly forward. Each of the soldiers... Their leader gripped a massive axe. All right, so they're after us, said Flip. The leader took position between both tents to prevent escape. The soldiers readied themselves to dive within. Oris, said Flip, what if they do harm the lovers? Oris frowned. No one's that foolish. Yet if they are, said Flip. They're not, said Oris, but her grip on the tree branch tightened. The soldiers dove into the tents and dragged Kara and Omi into the open air. Ugh. Both lovers were naked. They screamed in alarm, dragging blankets out after themselves and clutching them to their fronts. But when the soldiers saw who they were holding, they stopped. Both of them looked at their leader in confusion, and he lowered his axe slightly. What under the sky is this, he said. Oris could just hear his growl from so far away. I thought we were supposed to find them here, said one of the soldiers, a short, thick man with skin nearly as dark as Kara's. The commander turned, scanning the tree line. They have slipped away. The other soldier was a woman with short, flaming red hair and a nasty scar under her mouth. Now she hauled Ombi up by the wrist, brandishing her sword in his face. You, tell us where they've gone. Oris tensed, but Kara looked at their attackers without a trace of fear. You threatened 2 members of the Guild of Lovers. Oris tensed, but Ombi looked at the woman without a trace of fear. You threatened 2 members of the Guild of Lovers. Unhand us at once, or the High King's justice will not be gentle in its punishment. The soldier holding Kara's arm dropped it as if he had been scalded, but the fiery-haired woman only scowled deeper and pushed her face closer to Ombi's. We do not serve the High King, and her laws are meaningless to us. The commander stepped forwards. With one massive fist, he backhanded the red-haired woman. She fell as if struck with a boulder. The laws protecting lovers are older than Underrealm itself, he growled, and they are just. The High King desecrates their history to claim them as her own, but that does not mean you are free to cast them aside. He turned to Ombi and bowed his head. My apologies. Ombi rubbed his wrist with his other hand and bowed his head in turn. Your apology is accepted, and with my gratitude. Look for a trail, barked the commander. This fire was recently built. Go. The red-haired woman climbed to her feet with a sullen scowl, but she did as he had bid. She and the other soldier began to pace the edge of the clearing, searching for tracks. Oris looked to Flip. We can get ahead of them. Certainly, said Flip, nodding. Kill the big one first? If anyone's got answers, it's him, said Oris. Kill the other 2 and then find out who sent him. Light flared in Flip's eyes again. Fair enough. He tumbled back off the branch, air catching him as he fell. Oris climbed down after him. Oris and Flip stalked through the forest. Their foes had no gift for stealth, and it was easy to outmaneuver them. They took position on either side of the soldier's course and drew into the trees. The footsteps came closer. The commander's heavy The commander's heavy footfalls were much louder than his companions. Oris and Flip ducked out of sight as they passed just a pace or 2 away. Oris's gaze met Flip's, and they nodded to each other. Oris darted out from behind her, retreated the short man. With one brawny arm, she seized his neck and snapped it. Flip lunged, sinking his long knife into the side of the woman's throat and dragging it out the front. She gurgled and thrashed weakly as her blood gushed down her chest. Both of them fell to the ground as their commander whirled. His grip tightened on his axe, and he growled. Good day, said Oris cheerily. Forgive us for surprising you. Though, to be fair, you tried to surprise us first, said Flip. An excellent point, Flip, said Oris, nodding at him as though she had not thought of that. In fact, I believe you intended to kill us. Flip stepped slowly to the right. Of course, it's not the first time someone's tried that. When was the first time, Flip? Said Oris. She started to pace around to the left so that she and Flip moved to opposite sides of the man. He growled and raised his weapon higher as he tracked her motion. I think it was Corel, down near the Heddish border. I'm working really hard to put a stupid reference in this book right now. When was the first time, Flip? Said Oris. She started to pace around to the left so that she and Flip moved to opposite sides of the man. He growled and raised his weapon higher as he tracked her motion. I think it was Corell, down near the Heddish border, said Flip. That woman who got possessive of the merchant's son I had charmed away from her. When was that? 1300. Are you drunk already? We hadn't even met then. Flip snapped his fingers and shook his head. Of course. Forgive me. 1305 it must have been. That was the Hedgeman tour. Ah, of course, said Oris, tilting her head back. Fond memories. A more innocent time for both of us. But do you know what, Flip? What's that, dearest? Even that fool knew better than to go after you and me with only 2 swords beside him. Beside her. So, the reference, in case anybody missed it, because you're a person and not a, wildly obsessive nerd goblin like me, they reference Corell and 1300, which in this case refers to the year 1300. But this is, of course, a reference to the Corellian YT 1300, the light freighter, one of which becomes better known as the Millennium Falcon. Though the commander kept his attention on both of them, for the most part his gaze was fixed on Oris. Now he snarled, "Keep prattling if you wish. Your death nears regardless, and when you die I shall be raised in my father's estimation forever and secure my place in history." A shadow passed over Oris's expression, but Flip put his fingers in his mouth and whistled, drawing the man's attention. "I'm sorry, friend," Flip said easily. "I don't know that you fully understand your predicament. You're only alive because we want to know who sent you after us." The brute bared his teeth in a savage grin. "Come closer and I might tell you." Flip looked past him. "I don't think he wants to play, Oris." Oris's jaw clenched. "Then he dies." Flip sighed and rolled his shoulders. "Fine, I need a piss anyway." A glow sprang into his eyes. The brute whirled to face him, crouching in a fighting stance. The glow in Flip's eyes swelled, his feet shifting on the forest floor. Under his breath he muttered words, and a strange tongue and flame sprang to life in his palms. With a sweep of his arms he sent the fire arcing forth. Its heat scorched the ground. The flames rushed to envelop the stranger, and then they split as though they had met an invisible wedge. In a moment they had died away, leaving the brute untouched. And then they split as though they had met an invisible wedge. In a moment they had died away, leaving the brute untouched. His bright teeth showed in a grin. Oris frowned. "Flip, don't play with your food." Flip gave her a quick glance, his brow a confused twist. "I didn't... Oh, never mind." He widened his stance once more, and the glow returned to his eyes. This time when he put forth his hands they crackled with pale blue lightning. It bounced and jittered around his fingers as he bent them, unleashing the lightning towards his foe. But the bolt stopped just short. In midair it bent, slamming harmlessly into the ground. Again the brute smiled, and then he advanced. Oris?" said Flip, his voice shaking. Oris sprang towards them, but the brute was closer. He seized Flip's coat and slammed his forehead into the wizard's face. Flip went slack in his grip, stunned. The brute raised his axe to drag the blade across Flip's throat. Oris reached them just in time. She pulled her dagger from her belt and plunged it into the man's side. He dropped Flip with a roar of pain before whirling on Oris. Thrice Oris swiped at him, driving him back. The man was larger than she was, but just as fast. She could not land another blow. He had not slowed at all, despite the dagger still protruding from his side. Suddenly he launched a savage swing that nearly took Oris's arm off. With 2 hands she drove her sword into the axe head, knocking it away. But he came for her again, and now she was the one who had to retreat. A slash came towards her face. Oris had to throw herself aside to dodge it. She rolled and came up with a fist-sized rock in her hand, hiding it behind her back. They circled each other. Oris was breathing heavily, but the man did not seem winded at all. Clearly he was more than her match. So she grinned at him. "You're more of a challenge than your friends were," she said. "Now, before I finish you off, do you have a name?" He gave a grunt of laughter. "I am Enfil. From this day forth it is a name that shall be immortal." Again a shadow seemed to pass before Oris's eyes. "Friend, I'm afraid you've come for the wrong person. My death shall earn you no glory." Enfil's lip curled. "Are you lying or ignorant? I suppose it matters little." Oris raised a finger from her sword hilt. "I'm neither lying nor ignorant. I'm distracting you." Enfil's brow furrowed. Oris lunged with her sword, and he raised his axe to block it. But then she brought the large stone whipping around and smashed it into his groin. He crumpled with a strangled cry, just as Flip stabbed him through the spine. Enfil's back arched, a choked grunt escaping him. His axe fell from his limp fingers as he reached futilely behind him. Flip wore a grim little smile, despite the heavy bruise now darkening most of his face. "Apologies," he said. "Your conversation had begun to bore me." Oris drove her sword into Enfil's stomach. For a moment his plate-sized hand scrabbled for her throat. Then he slumped to the ground, eyes lifeless. "He had some guts in him," said Flip. "Less of them now," said Oris, studying the corpse. "What was that business with your magic?" She knelt and drew both her weapons out of Enfil's body, wiping them clean on his jerkin. Fresh blood leaked out of him, soaking into the loamy ground. Flip's expression dampened. "To tell the truth, I don't know. That's never happened before." "Now, don't lie," said Oris, sheathing her weapons and walking off towards the tents. "I've heard from many lovers that you have trouble performing." He punched her in the shoulder, which was a bit like a mouse trying to slap a horse. "Never, not once have you heard such a filthy lie. I pay them too much for them to spread that kind of slander." Neither of them noticed the body as it began to stir behind them, but suddenly a powerful itch came across Oris's skin. She stopped, hissing through her teeth and scratching at her arms. There was a feeling like a vast hole in her stomach, a pit deeper than she could fathom. An emptiness devoid of either warmth or cold. "Oris," said Flip, frowning, "what is it?" "I don't know," said Oris. "It's like 1,000 little bedbug bites all at once." And behind them, silent and unseen, Enfil rose to his feet. Oris's amulet burst into a bright glow again. Flip recoiled, staring at it with wide eyes. What in the dark below is that? Oris stared at the amulet. Then, too late, she tried to cry a warning. Enfil's fist crashed into the back of Flip's head like a boulder. He fell to the ground, senseless. Oris went for her blade, but Enfil seized her wrist in an iron grip. His other hand gripped her head to slam her face back into his own. Stars exploded in her vision as she fell on her back in the dirt. "You learned no lesson from me," rumbled Enfil. He knelt, straddling Oris, and his hands wrapped around her throat. "You let yourself get distracted, and now it is time for your end." Oris could scarcely understand what was happening. Enfil's face and body were still covered in sticky red. The cloying scent of gore washed over her, making her gag, but his wounds were gone. There was not even a scratch where she had gutted him. His knee pinned her right arm. With her left, she tried desperately to pull his hands away, but his thumbs were pressing harder, tighter into her windpipe. Oris's vision was fading, and a darkness crept into the edges. "How?" she managed to gasp. Enfil grinned. Blood dripped from his lips to spatter on Oris's cheek. "My father's gifts are mighty, but that no longer matters to you. Sleep, let life end. Dark take me if I will," thought Oris. With shaking fingers she drew her dagger and plunged it into Enfil's gut. The brute growled, but he held on. Oris dragged the dagger out and stuck him again and then again, but each stab came weaker, each shallower. "I'm not dying here," Oris thought savagely. "I don't know where I'm meant to die, but it won't be some backwater forest no one's ever heard of." Yet the darkness grew thicker. Her thoughts swam, and Enfil's grip kept tightening. Footsteps, someone running. Through the darkness in her vision, Oris saw Enfil glance to his right, then a heavy boot crashed into his jaw. The brute fell back. Oris gasped as the darkness retreated from her eyes. She rolled on her side, clutching her throat once more. Flip? But that had not been his boot. Oris looked up. Above her stood a woman. She was short and slim, but wiry with muscle. Her plain traveling clothes looked dusty and worn from many leagues. Around her was wrapped a green half-cloak that ended at her rump, its hood thrown back to reveal golden hair, long but braided and done up. At her sides hung 2 short swords that looked to be of fine craft. Wordlessly had she come and wordlessly struck. Still now she said nothing as she drew her blades, swinging them in one quick circle. Their fine steel glinted in the shafts of sunlight that filtered through the trees. Enfil looked up at her with a savage growl. Blood came from his nose to join the red streaks of his earlier wounds. "Who in the dark below are you?" The woman did not answer. She stalked towards him, blades held ready. Enfil glanced over. His axe lay a few paces away. Now he dove for it, throwing himself across the ground on hands and knees. The woman darted for him. As he stretched for the axe, her blade came down and cut off his hand. Enfield screamed, falling on his back and clutching the stump of his wrist. Before he could recover, the woman kicked him hard in the side of the head. Enfield rolled face down, still clutching his arm. The woman flipped her swords around to hold them reversed. With a savage thrust, she drove them into Enfield's back. The blades pierced through his shoulders into the ground, pinning him. As Enfield screamed, his voice now muffled by the dirt, the woman knelt and seized his hair. Pulling it up, she revealed a tattoo on the back of his neck. Oris had never seen the design before. It was like a circular, never-ending knot woven of thorny brambles. Not quite circular, it's weaving. The woman drew a dagger and began to cut the tattoo out of his skin. If Enfield had cried out before now, he screamed loud enough to tear his throat, but try as he might, he could not rise, not with the blades pinning his arms to the ground and the woman kneeling between his shoulders. In a moment, the grisly work was done. The woman tossed the tattoo aside. Then she stood and drew her blades from Enfield's back. His screams subsided, to be replaced by agonized whimpers. Father. It came out as a piteous moan. The woman brought one sword back around and cut off his head. The woods fell to utter silence. It lasted for several long moments. Oris stared at Enfield's body, half expecting him to move again, to rise and take his revenge on the woman. But nothing happened. Slowly, Oris levered herself up, rising to her feet. "Have you any wine to drink?" said the woman. "Have you any wine to drink?" said the strange woman, turning to her. "I do not often partake, but after a killing—" "What?" said Oris. "Who under the sky are you?" The woman pursed her lips. "Not very grateful. I just saved your lives. If you have no wine, I shall at least need a ready tent, but you should rouse your friend." Oris had almost forgotten that Flip still lay unconscious on the ground. She went to him and rolled him over, slapping his cheeks gently until his eyes fluttered open. "Was that?" he grumbled, blinking up at her. "Oh, you're alive. We won, then." "After a fashion," said Oris. "Come, we have a new friend." "I like new friends." Flip lifted a hand and then groaned as Oris pulled him to his feet. As he steadied himself, he looked the woman over unashamedly, brows slowly rising. "Hello, friend. Have you a name?" "You can call me Sylvan," said the woman. "Sylvan," said Flip, "like the daughter of Renna the Sunmane." Sylvan inclined her head. "Just so. A princely name for a princely woman." "Calm yourself," Oris told him. These fucking idiots are the best. I love them so much. Sylvan smiled. Oris decided her brilliant hazel eyes were far too distracting when she did that. "Your tents are this way, I believe," she said. So saying... So saying, she sheathed her sword, scooped up the flap of skin with the tattoo, and marched off towards the camp. Oris and Flip looked at each other. "Do you?" said Oris, waving a hand in the direction Sylvan had gone. "Never seen her before," said Flip, "at least not that I recall. But I sometimes get quite drunk behind the blue door." "She isn't a lover, Flip," said Oris, rolling her eyes. "Come on, let's get after her. It's past time we checked on Ombi and Kara besides." Ombi and Kara had dressed themselves, but only partially, and they were enjoying the fire. They glanced up curiously as Sylvan entered the clearing. Ombi smiled. "Good day," he said to her. "You seem friendlier than the last uninvited guests who came here." "I can be very friendly," said Sylvan. I am Sylvan, and you are lovers in the employ of these... Sylvan smiled. "I can be very friendly. I'm Sylvan. You are lovers in the employ of these two, are you not?" She pointed back to Oris and Flip, who had just reached the clearing. Kara glanced at Ombi. "We are? And what are they paying you?" Again the lovers looked at each other. 3 silver a night, said Ombi. "I thought the going rate was twice that," said Sylvan. "They are protecting us in these wilds," said Kara. "Their payment is the difference." "I wish to end your service," said Sylvan. "I beg your pardon," said Flip, his casual smirk vanishing in an instant. Sylvan ignored him. From a pouch at her belt she drew 6 gold weights. These she tossed to Ombi and Kara, 3 each, and they caught the coins deftly. "I think you will agree 3 weights a night is more than generous," said Sylvan. "You shall have to pay them their 3 silvers difference for safe transport, but you still come out quite well." "Indeed," said Kara, nonplussed, "but we are in no need of charity. We're happy with our service and have no wish to cease it." "Oh," said Sylvan, placing a hand to her chest. "Forgive me for not being clear. I'm not paying you to stop entertaining them. I'm paying you to start entertaining me instead." The lovers' eyes widened. Flip and Oris had gone stock still. "You can't do that," cried Oris. Sylvan smirked at her. "Oh, come now. You must know the guild rules as well as I do, or better." Flip's face had taken on a pained sort of twist. She can, in fact, do as she says, but only if the lovers agree." He turned pleading eyes to Kara and Ombi. "Have we not been good to you, my loves? And generous?" Kara raised the coins. "Not this generous."
If the arrangement is satisfactory, then let us retire, said Sylvan. Comfort is especially sweet after a fight. We can use that tent. That's my tent, said Oris. Oh, I'm merely borrowing it, said Sylvan. My thanks. She looked so innocently grateful that Oris's next angry outburst died on her lips. Sylvan strode to the tent and threw back the flap. Ombi and Kara hurried inside. Sylvan paused, giving Flip and Oris a final smile and a wave. Then she clambered in after the lovers. Oris and Flip stood there for a long moment, rooted to the spot and looking at the tent. Who in the dark below is this sow? Cried Oris. Manners, came Sylvan's voice, slightly muffled by the tent. The lovers giggled. Flip shook his head. Language, came Sylvan's voice, slightly muffled by the tent. The lovers giggled. Flip shook his head ruefully. Come on, darling. Let's get those bodies in the river before they start to stink. Come, love, let's get those bodies in the river before they start to stink. As Enfil's life fled him far away in a forgotten castle, the glow of magic left the Lord's eyes. His fingers splayed across the deck, and he leaned back in his chair. Oh, Enfil, he said softly, my poor child. For a moment he allowed himself to bow his head and weep, but soon he forced himself to focus. He had found her at last, but she did not show any sign of her power, and she had not recognized anything Enfil had said to her. The Lord had guessed correctly, then. She did not know the truth about herself. That meant she was doomed. It would have been preferable for Enfil to succeed, of course. His loss was a grievous blow, for the Lord loved all his children. But destiny was more important than any one person. It was greater than any of the Lord's adherents, greater even than the Lord himself. This was not a threat. It would only require a slightly different set of steps now. With a weary sigh, the Lord bent over the map, trying to guess where she was heading, but hardly a moment had passed where the... But hardly a moment had passed before there was a loud pounding at his door. The Lord looked up, frowning. Come. The door swung open, shuddering as it struck the wall behind it. In strode a man, young but massive, taller and wider in shoulder even than Enfil had been. His face would have been beautiful were it not so often twisted in a scowl as it was now. Beric, said the Lord in mild surprise, you were supposed to be on your way to the border of Wadeland. Beric's shoulders tensed. Waiting in a cold stronghold for who knows how long. I am not meant for such things, Father. When I learned you had found her, I had to come and see you at once. He fell to one knee, bowing his head. Please, Father, you must recall Enfil and let me hunt her down for you. His lord sighed, and his voice was heavy with grief. It is too late for that, my child. Beric looked up, his eyes shooting wide. Do you mean, is she dead? No, said the Lord quietly. The mission claimed Enfil's life. An unforeseen player joined the game. She knew Enfil's gift and how to defeat him. She is one of theirs. He practically spat the word. Beric rose, clenching his fists. Then let me avenge him and secure your victory at the same time. Send me, Father. None can stand against me in the training yard, not even Rogan. The Lord's expression turned dour. You received my gift not only because of your prowess, but also because of your loyalty to the cause. That loyalty must rule your strength. Power is one thing, but focus and cunning are needed now. Beric fumed for a moment, and it seemed he would argue, but at last he bowed his head. Of course, Father, he grated. I only ask you this, that if the chance should come for me to prove myself to you, you will grant me the opportunity. You have nothing to prove to me, my son, said the Lord. Beric started to speak, but the Lord raised a hand to stop him. But I will remember what you have said. If the time should come to send you on that hunt, I will. Leave me now. At last Beric gave a satisfied smile, and he left. Okay. Blurp. I very much need to refresh my coffee and use the restroom. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll come and we'll work a little bit longer. I do have to go do some stuff today, but I won't end off at 8:30 like normal. I'll give it a little more time. I'll only be gone a few minutes, but in that time I will leave you with some tunage to keep you entertained. Are you not entertained?
I don't feel like I've put forth the same effort to resolve something because I can just will something into happening. That doesn't seem right to me.
In a fucked up way, I can actually relate to that quite a lot. But, for me, that's I've always had my fists. And man, is it way easier to solve problems when you're beating the shit out of somebody.
Are you listening now? What do you want to do now that that's happened?
I kinda wanna fucking punch you back.
Then do it. What's stopping you?
Now you have my attention. Pop, pop. Pop, pop. Pop, pop. Actually, Beauregard, lying next to the cobalt soul. Pop, pop. I got hands to you. That was awesome. That was awesome, and I want to know how to do that. You beat me.
Very well. Your first lesson begins now. Now, depending on what you wish to learn, there are different places where you can pull the information from the body.
Pop, pop.
Find wherever corruption is, root it out, and let the system do its job. If the system isn't doing its job, destroy the system.
see things.
Look over here.
Yeah?
You look like a nerd.
Try again.
Really attractive.
We'll keep working.
No,
You're
that still
okay.
wasn't it? At least, thanks for, telling me.
Yeah,
You know,
just to be aware of.
most people would just be like, you're a bitch, and then would leave.
I've been around you long enough that I can tell you were actually trying to be nice.
She was awesome.
She didn't say much.
That's why I liked her.
Really cool.
Okay. Let's get ourselves a little more work done. Chapter 3, A Bath and a Bond. Enfield's body threw up a tremendous splash of water as Oris and Flip heaved it into the river. Oh, you know what? I actually need to re-export. Because... we significantly rewrote the next couple of chapters. Everything is quite different. We are on Chapter 3, A Bath and a Bond. This being, of course, the chapter where Oris, the lead character of the book, gets a nice, long, and lingering glance at Sylvan's boobies. Chapter 3, A Bath and a Bond. Enfield's body threw up a tremendous splash of water as Oris and Flip heaved it into the river. The current dragged him downstream, floating with his back up. Oris lobbed his head in after the body. They had already thrown the brute's lackeys in. Current dragged him down. Enfield's body threw up a tremendous splash of water as Oris and Flip heaved it into the river. The current dragged him downstream, floating with his back up. Oris lobbed the head after the body. They had already thrown the brute's lackeys in, and their bodies were now out of sight, carried off by the water. Flip had taken something from Enfield's belt before they flung him in. Now he picked it up from the riverbank and turned it over in his hands, examining it. It was a long dagger, and as Flip pulled it from its sheath, Oris could see a rune carved in its blade. "What's that?" she said. "Something interesting," muttered Flip. "See here? This rune is one of cancellation." "Ah," said Oris, arching a brow. "Of course." Flip rolled his eyes and sighed. "It means you can stop spells. Some of them, anyway." "Really?" said Oris. "So that's how he avoided your magic." "So that's how he avoided your magic?" "No, Flip's mouth twisted in frustration and his eyes flicked back and forth. He often struggled to explain magic to Oris. Its concepts were taught only at the Academy for Wizards where he had trained, and Oris had picked up very little of such learning over the years they had traveled together. "It only works on some spells," said Flip, "and it's cancellation, not nullification. Nullification is stopping a spell as it's being cast. It's immensely difficult to perform and even harder to work into a rune. I don't even know if you could. And a dagger that could do that, it would be priceless. It certainly wouldn't hang from the belt of a brute in this backwater wood." "All right," said Oris slowly. "So this one cancels," said Flip. "It stops a lingering spell that's been cast to stay put." Oris understood at last. "Like your walls of air." "You have it," said Flip. "It broke my wall without alerting me. A neat trick. I think I'll keep this." He flipped the dagger over the back of his fingers before sliding it into its sheath and looping it onto his belt. Blood from all three corpses had gotten on Oris's hands and arms. Flip had cast off his coat to avoid staining it the same way. Now they went a little ways upriver where the water was... calmer, and stripping down, they climbed in to bathe. Often Oris's gaze turned southwest towards the camp. Staring won't make them hurry any, love, said Flip. What will, growled Oris. We need to be getting on our way. I do not think we should hurry her at all, said Flip. After what she did to that brute, well, I, for one, have no wish to disturb her. Oris sniffed, picking at some gore that had gotten under her fingernails. It had likely come while stabbing Enfil over and over again. The memory made her throat ache. She could feel his fingers there. What do you suppose this is all about? Flip went on. His tone was light and airy, but Oris could hear the worry that underlaid it. I don't just mean folk trying to kill us, that's not unheard of, but the way Enfil found us all the way out here in the wilds, and then Sylvan almost at the same time. That's strange, isn't it? Hey, Kiki Hot. I understand. It's a good question for her, said Oris. It's a good question for her, said Oris, hence my eagerness for her to emerge. Flip's mouth worked for a moment. It's got something to do with Wellmont, though, doesn't it? His hand rose to rub at his bare chest. Oris's eyes went there, but then they sharply jerked away. No, she said. It doesn't. It can't. Her voice held more denial than conviction, but that was all she could summon. Enfil said, I'm clean enough, said Oris. She climbed out and threw on her clothes. Just before heading back to camp, she met Flip's gaze. Shed your worries. No one knows what happened at Wellmont. She turned and walked off. Flip watched her go. Least of all us, he said sadly. Oris rebuilt the campfire and sat by it. When Flip returned, he did not mention Wellmont again. They ate some food silently, both pretending they could not hear the muffled noises coming from Oris' tent, where Sylvan and the lovers had retreated. The more time that wore on, the more anxious Oris became. Who knew but that someone else like Enfil was coming? She might not be so lucky twice to notice something was amiss before they arrived. The thought gave her pause. In fact, she had not become aware of Enfil without help. She lifted up the amulet and looked through it, letting its shape distort her view of the surrounding woods. It had been inert since Enfil's rise, and no trace of a glow shined from it now. Yet it seemed suddenly a foreign thing. She could not look upon it in the same way she always had. Flip noticed her studying the crystal. His eyes lit with interest, and he scooted closer. I had almost forgotten. What was that business with the amulet earlier? I do not know, said Oris. But it happened twice. The first was just before Enfil arrived. It was what made me realize the woods had grown too quiet. Has it ever done that before? Never. Might I take a look at it? Flip extended a hand. She hesitated, but it was Flip. So she lifted the leather thong from around her neck and pressed the crystal into his palm. He turned it over in his hands, inspecting it closely. There are no runes, he muttered. Why should there be runes? I thought it might be enchanted. Like the dagger. Excuse me. Nothing holds magic better than crystal, but enchantment requires runes, so far as I know. Where did you get it, anyway? Oris felt a tightening in her chest. Before answering, she held out her hand and waited for Flip to return it to her. He did so at once, and she put it around her neck again. I barely remember, said Oris. I've had it since I was a child. It was the only thing I had for my own. From your parents? Oris's jaw clenched. I wouldn't know. Flip nodded kindly and turned his gaze from her. She was grateful he did not press the matter. Flip knew more than anyone about her childhood, but he never asked for more than she gave him. Before they could speak further, Sylvan emerged from the tent at last. She squinted up at the sun as she shrugged into her green cloak. She had not laced up the front of her jerkin, and Oris's jaw clenched. Good of you to join us, said Oris. Are you sure you've rested enough? By my reckoning, you've been in there for at least 3 hours. I know, said Sylvan, who seemed not to notice Oris's needling tone. I even slept for one of them. We heard, said Flip, grinning. I'll have a few answers from you now, said Oris. Will you, said Sylvan. Pew, 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 pew. Hey, thanks so much for the follow, Ashfisher86. That's a name that seems easy to mispronounce, unfortunately. Feel free to grab yourself a free book at the link I just dropped in chat, Ashfisher. That's a good username. That will get you a free ebook copy of Nightblade, my best-selling fantasy novel, and the first book of Underrealm. It'll get you nice and addicted, so that you want to go read all the rest of the books. But you'll enjoy the process, so you should go do it anyway. Before they could speak further, Sylvan emerged from the tent at last. She squinted up at the sun as she shrugged into her green cloak. She had not laced up the front of her jerkin, and Oris's jaw clenched. Good of you to join us, said Oris. Are you sure you've rested enough? By my reckoning, you've been in there for at least 3 hours. I know, said Sylvan, who seemed not to notice Oris's needling tone. I even slept for one of them. We heard, said Flip, grinning. I'll have a few answers from you now, said Oris. Will you? Said Sylvan. Very well, but I will have a bath, because if I do not, I might have to find something else to kill. The dragon's tail is off that way, is it not? Without waiting for an answer, she set off to the northeast. Oris blew a heavy, irritated breath through her nose. Flip's smile had only widened. Go on then, dear, and question her, he said. I'll stay with the lovers, just in case. Fine, said Oris, but we need to leave. Would you pack my things? Flip glared at her. I'm no manservant. Oris had to smile. Come now, you never complained when Kara and Ombi order you around. As if on cue, the lovers came out of the tent. Ombi came first, and then he turned to help pull Kara out. The girl was still a bit flustered, her dark cheeks darker still with the flush, and she leaned on Ombi's arm as she came to join him by the fire. Sky above, she said, sitting. And dark below, said Ombi with a grin. That went longer than I expected. I as well, said Kara, giggling. Flip folded his arm. And do the two of you feel any shame whatsoever for abandoning the two of us so easily? Ombi's smile only widened. None at all. Come, sit with us, grumpy one. I shall rub your shoulders if that will ease your grousing. I can't... I can't, said Flip, giving Oris a glower. Apparently, I have to pack the tents. Kara sighed. Then we will help you, of course, though in truth I only want to sleep the rest of the day away. The two of them rose to help Flip pack while Oris set off after Sylvan. When Oris reached the stream, Sylvan was already in the water. Here the river dwindled, for it cut a deep trench into a rise in the land. The river's flow brought fresh, crisp air, and lilies collected in little pools on either shore to sweeten it. The banks were thick-packed dirt with many rocks to hold their shape, providing an easy climb in and out. Many of the rocks had fallen into the river over time, so that it was all solid footing from one side to the other, and perfect for bathing. It was why Oris and Flip had chosen the spot earlier, and why Sylvan had chosen it as well. Sylvan's wiry frame was even more impressive now, bare as it was, and Oris was struck still for a moment. There were some scars on her, but far fewer than Oris thought there might have been, certainly fewer than Oris herself bore. Now that her hair was undone and flowing freely, Oris could see that it was much longer than it had appeared. Though her face was hard, with an uncompromising look, it was also beautiful, and her hazel eyes were piercing and intense as a falcon's. Those eyes suddenly focused on Oris. Sylvan paused in her scrubbing for a moment. Oris realized she had been staring and cleared her throat, folding her arms and leaning against a tree. But she did not avert her gaze. Sylvan did not seem embarrassed, and so there seemed little reason not to enjoy herself. You look cold, said Oris. Sylvan laughed. It had a strange sound to it, rough, as though she was unused to such a mood. Did you come to talk or to stare? Oris chose to ignore that. Who are you? You have my name. You seem a bright woman, said Oris. You know I want more than that. Why are you here? Sylvan pointed to the shore. Oris looked down and saw that a coin purse sat at her feet. My master sent me to hire the two of you into his service, said Sylvan. She leaned back to float face up. Oris stooped to lift a purse. She undid the string, holding it shut, and looked inside. Her brows rose appreciatively, but then she looked back to Sylvan. It's not good enough, she said. Sylvan's head came up, and she frowned. You've not even heard the job. I mean your explanation. We don't know you, so how do you know us? How did you know about Enfil's tattoo? What was he, anyway? Sylvan sighed and stood. She climbed out of the river and picked up her cloak, using it to dry off before she donned her trousers and then her jerkin. I suppose that is safe to answer, she said, seemingly half to herself. They are called Shadeborn, nasty brutes, immune to magic, as you saw, and impossible to kill while that tattoo remains on them. A pit had formed in Oris's stomach. It reminded her of the feeling she had had when Enfil rose from the dead. A voice in her mind whispered in warning, but she did not quite know the shape of the danger. There are more like him? Many, I believe, said Sylvan. Her playfulness had fallen away, and she looked deadly solemn as her fingers fiddled with the laces of her jerkin, but I can explain little else. I was sent to retrieve, not to educate. My master will teach you more, but you should know this, Oresiat. Worse folk than Enfil will come after you, and you will not know how to defeat them. Oris's eyes widened. Where did you learn that name? Sylvan arched a brow. That name? You mean your name? I'm called Oris. Barely a handful of people know it short for anything at all. A matron of lovers in Wellmont, said Sylvan with a shrug. Her name was Kendlin. Forgive her. She did not know you held it as a great secret, and so she saw no harm in telling me. It would seem you have loose lips when you are behind the blue door, but then there is no better place to have them. Oris ground her teeth, determined to ignore that last comment. You've been following us since Wellmont, she said. Why? What do you want with us? I told you, said Sylvan, to hire you. It is a nobler intention than Enfil had, I think you will agree. And who were they, said Oris. What do they want with us? Her tone was defiant, but a yearning lay behind it, a desire for something she could not name. Sylvan's fingers stilled on her jerkin strings, and she looked up at Oris in surprise. Not us, just you. Did you not realize that? Oris closed her eyes and forced herself to take a long, slow breath. I'll tell you the same thing I told Enfil. You've made a mistake. I'm no one special. Yes, you are, Aresiat, said Sylvan. Fate chose you long ago, though my master and other interested parties have only just learned of it. You should be grateful. It means you are capable of doing more good than most could with their lives. But I don't want any part of that, insisted Oris. I'm perfectly happy with my life just the way it is, thank you. Are you really? Said Sylvan, frowning. I am, said Oris obstinately. Sylvan slowly shook her head as she finished the knot in her jerkin string and climbed the bank. Just before the top, her foot slipped on a dislodging stone. Her hand swung up, and Oris caught it without thinking to pull her up. Sylvan used the movement to draw closer, her face barely a hand's breadth from Oris's. Their eyes met, and Sylvan let the silence stretch for the space of a few breaths. Oris was reminded of Enfil's face close to hers, but now the smell that flooded her nostrils was sweet, all faded wool and soft skin and wet hair. I'm afraid the choice is out of your hands. Sylvan's voice was barely above a murmur. You were chosen, and many folk now know it. Some of them wish to kill you. Others will want to use you for their own ends, and some want to help you achieve your destiny. My master is one of the latter. If nothing else, you should at least be grateful that I am the one who found you first. Or second, I should say, but Enfil no longer counts. The pit in Oris's stomach swelled. Why, she said again, and now she was pleading. Why me? Sylvan cocked her head. What happened at Wellmont, Aresiat? She asked quietly. Oris swallowed hard. Nothing, and stop calling me that. It's Oris. Sylvan gave a disappointed smile and marched off back towards the camp. For a little while, Oris could only stand there staring after her. At last, when Sylvan was out of sight, Oris mustered herself to follow. Flip had almost finished packing up by the time they reached the camp. The tents were laid out flat on the ground. Flip's eyes glowed, and he twisted his hands. Gusts of wind caught the edges of the tent and rolled them up. The glow died, and Flip smiled with satisfaction as the lovers scooped them up and wedged them into their packs. Then he noticed Oris. You're back, dear, he said, and just in time to avoid helping with the work. How very like you. We are ready to go, then, said Sylvan. Flip arched a brow. I'm afraid I don't understand. We are ready to go. I don't know how that concerns you. Oris's mouth twisted, but she raised the coin purse Sylvan had given her. She means to hire us. Flip's brow furrowed. Does she now? It did not quite sound like a question. Sylvan smiled. Do not worry yourself, she said. I am offering quite a lot of coin. Flip looked to Oris for confirmation. Oris tossed him the purse, and when he looked inside, his eyes widened. Well, that's a gracious first gesture, to be sure. And what's the job? The first task, said Sylvan, is to come with me to Red Brook and meet my master so that he can tell you the real task, which will come with its own payment. Flip's frown returned. All of this, he hoisted the purse, just to hear what he has to say? He's a man of means, said Sylvan, shrugging. I hope you're aware, said Flip, that in our line of work we deal with all manner of characters. Some are a pleasure to work with, some are less than savory, and one of the things we've learned is that an overabundance of generosity isn't a desirable trait in a business partner. Sylvan looked incredulous, and her gaze went back and forth from Flip to Oris. I may not understand. Do you want me to reduce the payment? In an instant, Flip had pocketed the purse. Don't be ridiculous, he said. What he's saying, put in Oris, is that someone may well offer a great purse for a small task because they plan to reclaim it later, say, from our corpses. Sylvan smiled. Ah, I understand such caution, she said, but I assure you that is not my intention, nor is it my master's. I am, of course, glad to hear it, said Flip, still with his easygoing smile. But just in case you're lying to us, and of course you're not, but just in case, please remember that the only reason you can hire us at all is that anyone who's ever crossed us ended up on the pyre instead of us. Ended up on a pyre. I don't know if you've heard of past times we were betrayed, but trust me, it was not quick, it was not pleasant, it was not quiet, and it was not soon forgotten about. Too many. Trust me, it was not quick, it was not quiet, and it was not soon forgotten about. The clearing fell silent. The lovers looked rather anxiously back and forth between Flip and Sylvan, but Sylvan merely studied Flip. Her eyes narrowed, and a thin The clearing fell silent. The lovers looked rather anxiously back and forth between Flip and Sylvan, but Sylvan merely appraised Flip with narrow eyes, a thin smile at her lips. "You are more than you look," she said at last. "I respect your caution, and I shall certainly remember your words." Flip clapped his hands, and the tension in the air evaporated. "Excellent. In that case, through fire and flame, through fight and flight, our service, both in sword and in skill, are yours." He went to her and held out a hand. Sylvan took his wrist and shook firmly. Flip turned from her and went to Oris, smiling. "Cheer up, you great oaf," he told her. "Work, money, and another day to live. What more could we want?" "Many things," said Oris, still studying Sylvan, "but I shall hold my peace about them for now." But I'll hold my peace about them for now. Quickly they all gathered their things. The lovers had their own packs, but because they were so much lighter than Flip's and Oris's, they helped collect up anything that had not yet been packed. "Thank you, dear one," said Flip as Kara tied his sack of travel dishes to his rucksack. "You do much to ease the sting of your abandoning me." Kara and Ombi both laughed at that, and Ombi gave Flip a kiss on the cheek. "I shall never grow tired of the way you two speak. Heddish tongues are so odd." Sylvan's brows rose. Heddish? Oris's cheeks flushed, but Flip gave Sylvan a crafty look. "Yes, Heddish," he said. "Can't you hear it?" "I hear a Heddish accent," said Sylvan, "but I did not think there were many Draydens living in Hedgemond." The clearing went silent. Kara and Ombi were looking carefully back and forth between Flip and Sylvan. "How did you know he was a Drayden?" said Oris. Sylvan's eyes widened. Forgive me, I thought the lovers would have known." "We did," said Kara simply. Now Flip looked doubly shocked. "You did?" "We did," said Kara. "Us and every lover behind the blue door back in Wellmont. Forgive me, but to us it barely seems you were trying to hide it. Your features, your manner, the way you spend coin, the way you talk, under the accent. Any lover with some experience can read it in you." Flip looked to Oris. "Am I that obvious?" Oris shrugged. "How would I know? You're the only Drayden I've ever met." Ombi stepped closer then, and he put a hand on Flip's arm. "We have known and we have not minded," he said gently. "We came with you on this journey knowing it already, and no lover would ever spread the secret. The guild has rules. Besides, we all have yesteryears we would rather not talk about," said Kara. "My own cousin is a Yeren." Flip did not answer at once, but a weak smile of relief crept into his face. He gave Kara a nod. "Thank you for your understanding," said Oris. She bowed. "And for my part, I deeply regret having brought up a sensitive topic," said Sylvan. "That is not how I would have wished to begin our relationship." "One cannot complain of a road when its end is so welcoming," said "One shouldn't complain of a rough road when its end is so welcoming," said Flip. "Only I'd beg you to be more careful with that knowledge in future. I was afraid Kara and Ombi would turn and march straight into the woods." Kara and Ombi both laughed at that, and Ombi gave Flip a kiss on the cheek. "How could we dream of abandoning such interesting clients?" he said. "Well, if that is sorted," said Sylvan, "shall we be off to Redbrook?" Flip hesitated. "Ah, right, there's a wrinkle there. We're making for Kenlena by way of Drakmund." Sylvan frowned. "That is the opposite direction from where I wish to go." "We know it," said Oris, "but we are contracted to take the lovers there safely." "Contracted," said Sylvan. "That is a wrinkle. The guild would have your heads in other parts besides if you broke faith." "Well do we know it," said Flip, adjusting his stance. Sylvan's eyes lit, and she snapped her fingers. "Here, then. There's a house of lovers in Drakmund. We can transfer the contract there. Then I can send word to my master, and we shall lie low while he comes to meet us, provided everyone is in agreement." "That's up to the lovers," said Oris, looking at Kara and Ombi. "What say you? It's not so far from Drakmund to Canlena." Kara leaned close to Ombi, and they exchanged some whispered words. When they looked back to Oris, they nodded, but pouts twisted their lips. "I suppose it will do," said Kara, "though we shall mourn that our time with you was cut short." Oris smiled. They were lovers' words, but she enjoyed them nonetheless, "and we have enjoyed every minute in your company. Our parting shall be bitter indeed. But that will only make future joinings the sweeter," said Ombi, smiling coyly at her. Flip laughed, but then he turned to Sylvan. "Smoothing that wrinkle, however, raises another. It costs money to transfer contracts." Sylvan waved a hand. "That is of no issue. The cost shall be covered." "Shall it?" said Flip, raising his brows. "You're most generous with your coin. Who'd you say your master was?" Sylvan smiled sweetly at him. "I did not say, and the answer is to remain private for now, but he shall certainly introduce himself once we are all gathered together." "And how long shall it take him to reach us?" said Oris. "I'm not certain," said Sylvan. "It may take weeks, maybe as much as a month. I do not know precisely where he is at the moment, but once he finds out where you are, he shall make all possible haste there." Ombi and Kara looked at Oris as though they were seeing her for the first time. How impressive, said Kara. You are favored by a wealthy patron and one of great import, or so it seems. I'd give much to be free of such favors, said Oris through gritted teeth. Let's be off, that I might rid myself of it more quickly. And so saying, she led them all marching east. All right, how long is chapter 4? Do we have one more in us? Oh, yeah. Ah, yeah, bud. Chapter 4. Lovers' Quarrel. Stretchy McGee. Brr. Chapter 4, Lover's Quarrel. With Oris's guidance, the party made good time that day. She was gratified to see that Sylvan could keep a swift pace without a word of complaint. Almi and Kara were no slouches on the march either. In fact, Flip set the speed of the party, for he begged to rest often, and when he walked, he always trailed at the end of the group, so that sometimes they had to slow to accommodate him. When they stopped for the midday meal, the lovers sat with Sylvan. Flip eyed the three of them. Oris could tell when he was brewing a scheme, and she only hoped he would not do anything too foolish. After they finished eating, Oris helped the lovers stand. She sent them walking with Flip while she stayed behind to hide the sides of their meal. But Sylvan remained sitting, looking up at her expectantly. Would you get up, please? Said Oris in an even tone. I'm trying to conceal our presence now that we know folk are hunting us. Sylvan smirked. Rather than answer, she looked past Oris at Flip's retreating back. I see why you two are friends. Never lovers, were you? With Flip? Said Oris, aghast. Not on your life. I know better than to entangle either my heart or my loins with someone as shrewd as he. I'm glad to hear it, said Sylvan, her smirk growing to a smile. Well? Oris blinked. Well, what? Sylvan raised her arms. You helped the lovers up. I was waiting for the same. Oris scowled, but then she stepped forwards and took Sylvan's hand. She ignored the calluses on Sylvan's palms, no doubt left there by her swords. She ignored the softer skin of Sylvan's wrists, smooth and supple. She ignored the iron grip Sylvan took on her wrist, the tautening of the muscle beneath the flesh, and the little sigh as Sylvan pulled up while Oris pulled down. Oris took notice of none of it, very deliberately. Thank you, said Sylvan. Her smile was too knowing. I had no idea you would be so strong when I was sent to find you. Oris ignored that, too, and turned to set off after Flip and the lovers. Her cheeks were aflame. It's about the yearning. Less than an hour before the sunlight vanished, Oris called a halt. Actually, really quick. I just want to do one fast little thing. Okay. Where was I? Less than an hour before the sunlight vanished, Oris called a halt. They quickly built their tents. Oris built Flip's for him in repayment of his packing that morning, while Flip went off to set his magical barriers that would warn of anybody approaching. His fingers wove through the air as his eyes glowed. The air seemed to grow more solid, twisting around itself like the weave of a basket before returning to normal. But Oris knew there was still something there, an invisible barrier that could be passed through easily, but not without setting off a warning in Flip's mind. Sylvan fetched an armful of firewood without having to be asked. She built it into a cone, and Flip lit it with a minor spell, a flash in the eyes and a bolt of flame that caught the kindling at once. They were all too tired to hunt, especially with such plentiful food in their packs, and so they ate of dried meat and bread. Soon Sylvan stood from her place by the fire. "Well, I am off for sleep," she said. "I imagine we will set a watch tonight?" "I put up a spell," said Flip through a mouthful of food. "No one's getting close without my knowing." "They got past your barrier this morning," said Oris. "We should set a watch." Sylvan nodded. "Arrange it however you wish. Just wake me for my turn, one of you." Then she turned to the lovers. "If you two would join me?" Quickly, Kara and Olby finished their food and rose to go to her tent. "A moment," said Flip, raising a finger to halt them. "We have entered into a deal with you, but I have another separate proposal." Sylvan frowned. "What is it?" Flip grinned at her. "The greater part of your enjoyment of this journey was our companionship, but you've taken that away. I wish to win it back. I'd like to duel you for them." For a moment, Oris could only stare at him in shock. "Flip," she barked, "what are you doing?" But Flip ignored her, and Sylvan only smiled at Oris. She did not seem angry or even very alarmed. "It is quite all right. This is interesting." Her attention went back to Flip. "Are you certain you want to fight me?" "I am," said Flip, "and if I beat you, you'll release the lovers back into our service, and you'll continue to pay them the same rate you already offered. You certainly got the coin for it." The lovers looked at each other with wide eyes. Sylvan smiled, and her nostrils flared slightly. "I do, at that, but you seem to have much to gain here, and I have little. What do I get if I win?" "Of course, if you win, you get to keep the lovers," said Flip with a grin. Sylvan laughed, that same bark of harsh, unfamiliar delight. "You wager that which you do not possess. As it stands, I already have both the lovers." Flip shrugged. "Then make a proposal." Sylvan's teeth flashed. "Here it is, then. If I win, you return the payment I already offered. This first job is free." Oris reached up and gripped her hair as if she would pull it out. Surely Flip was not foolish enough to risk so much gold on such a bet. But Flip only grinned wider and said, "Agreed." "He does not speak for my share," shouted Oris. Flip shook his head. "Fine, you may keep your half, coward." Excuse me. And then he sent a wave of flame rushing towards Sylvan. Oris cried out, but Sylvan was no longer there. She had darted away from the roasting flames. Flip extinguished his fires before they lit the trees, but Sylvan did not press an attack. She wore a savage grin. "We did not discuss terms," she said. "I assume neither of us are allowed to kill or maim the other." "Why would I want you dead?" said Flip. "And you could not lop my arms off if you tried." Sylvan brushed a lock of hair behind her ear. "Why would I want your hands? The lovers say they are weaker than mine." That drew a laugh from Flip. "I love these fucking idiots so much." "Then stop bouncing your jaw." He loosed lightning upon her, but Sylvan raised her swords. The bolt struck the blades, arcing into their wooden hilts and Sylvan's leather gloves. Sylvan's whole body spasmed, but she did not fall. Flip barely had time to look surprised before she launched herself towards him. He yelped, and his eyes flashed with light again. He pressed air into the ground, propelling himself over Sylvan's head. She stopped on the spot and turned with a kick. It took Flip in the back, and he went sprawling on the ground. Sylvan darted for him at once. Flip saw her coming and lashed out with a narrow gust of air. It caught Sylvan's ankle, and she went tumbling. Her sword skittered away. Flip scrambled to his feet. Again his eyes lit, and wind blasted Sylvan, knocking her on her back and flinging her legs into the air. With Sylvan's blades gone, she lunged and threw her fists at Flip instead. He dodged and struck her glancing blows with wind, yet still she pressed towards him. Suddenly he kicked hard at her knee. Sylvan gave a heavy grunt of pain and fell face down. Flip dove on top of her, driving an elbow between her shoulder blades. He raised a handful of lightning to press into her body. Sylvan threw her head back, smashing Flip's nose. He flew off her with a cry of pain and a spurt of blood. And then suddenly Sylvan looked up at Oris, teeth bared in a secret grin. And in that instant Oris realized the truth. Sylvan was putting on a show. She was letting Flip keep up with her. Then Sylvan was on her feet again. She raised her fists as if she were in a bar fight, stalking towards Flip as he tried to find his feet. "Come on, then," said Sylvan. Her words were slurred as though she was punch-drunk, but now Oris could hear the affect Sylvan was adding. "No swords for me and no magic for you. Have you got the guts for it, wizardling?" Excuse me. Flip's nose was a bloody mess, but he only grinned, teeth stained with red, and raised his own fists to meet hers. He ducked her first clumsy swing and planted a fist in her gut. All of the breath seemed to leave Sylvan as she gave a great woof, but she got 2 blows in on Flip's ribs, making him wince and withdraw into himself. There was a moment. Oris only saw because she was looking for it. Sylvan had a clear shot at Flip's jaw. She did not take it. Her fist clenched, but it did not fly. Then Flip struck her with an uppercut that lifted her off the ground. Sylvan fell on her back, eyes rolling. Her hand scrabbled at the dirt beneath her, but she could find no purchase to lift herself up. Flip knelt and drew her up by the front of her leather jerkin, raising his fist, but he held it. "Had enough?" he said, his voice thick with blood. Sylvan spat up at him. "Dark take you." Flip punched her. Her head lolled to the side, though she was not quite out. "Come now," he said. "No reason for you to go to bed early. Yield." For a moment she did not answer, but only panted hard, looking up at him. Then she spit again, but to the side. A yield. Flip smiled down at her. Then he stood, but he pulled her up after him. She looked unsteady on her feet, and Flip threw an arm around her shoulder. "All right," he said. "I've decided I like you." Sylvan wiped blood from her lips. "I suppose I am honored?" Flip laughed, and his grip on her tightened. "Of course you are. Sleep well tonight, alone though you might be." He released Sylvan. She stumbled, but Oris caught her. Then the lovers came running up to Flip, clapping and laughing with delight. They tended to his nose and his other hurts, dabbing them gently with water and kissing them once they were clean. Flip's grin was as wide as Oris had ever seen it, and he turned it on her at last. "The world has been set to rights," he proclaimed. "Now we may take our comfort as conquerors. Have you a preference for companionship?" Oris shook her head. "I withheld my share from the wager. I'll also deny myself the reward, at least for one night. You've earned double, great fool though you might be. I'd better tend to our employer before she trips into the fire." She hoisted Sylvan up a bit to strengthen the point. Flip shrugged. "As you wish. I'll certainly not deny myself the gift." He kissed each lover on the cheek. "Come with me, my darlings. As I've heard it said recently, comfort is especially sweet after a fight." He led them off like a conquering general, and they all retreated within his tent. The instant they were out of sight, Sylvan's head stopped lolling, and she straightened. But she did not step away. Instead, she only smiled up into Oris's face. "Thank you for keeping my secret." Oris frowned. "I do not mind holding my tongue for an employer when there is no harm in the lie, but if you ask me to keep anything else from him, you will be disappointed." "Yet I did not ask you to do it," said Sylvan, her eyes too innocent. "It was of your own accord." Oris turned from her. "You can take the first watch. I am going to bed. We wasted too much time this morning between the fight with Enfield and your dalliance afterwards. Be ready to march much earlier tomorrow." "I certainly will," said Sylvan. "But will you find sleep tonight, without your usual comfort to soothe you into slumber?" Oris looked back at her, jaw clenched. I suppose I shall have to suffer through it somehow." Sylvan licked some of the blood from her lips. "As you wish. Good night, then." She sat with her back to both Oris and the fire, staring out into the darkness. Oris stood there, clenching and unclenching her fists, before she finally went for a restless night's sleep. They traveled in high spirits the next day, especially Flip. As they went, sometimes Flip or Kara would tell them a story or sing them a song. Kara did not have quite so fine a singing voice as Flip, but she knew more and better stories, and so it was equally pleasant to listen to either of them. Oris guessed they were 9 days away from Drakmund, or may up as much as a week if they continued at their leisurely pace. But autumn was... or may up as much as a week if they continued at their leisurely pace, but autumn was slowly claiming the land around them. It often drizzled, and sometimes the drizzle turned to rain. The day after that, the rain swelled into a terrible storm. Fortunately, they had sheltered overnight in a shallow cave, and so Oris ordered them to remain there for the day and wait for the weather to lighten. They kept a fire going, sitting around it and talking all the while, and every so often Oris or Flip would steal away to their tent with one of the lovers. Each time Sylvan wore a faint smile as she watched them go. "So, Sylvan," said Flip near midday, "you know a great deal about us, and we're at a disadvantage. Tell us something of yourself. Whence do you hail?" Sylvan looked somewhat surprised. She considered for a moment before answering. "I've lived many places in my life, but lately I have dwelled near Garsek." "Garsek?" Flip's brows rose. "I know it well." Kara peered at both of them curiously. "I was always curious why someone..." "Certainly curious if I mentioned it twice in 2 sentences." Kara peered at both of them curiously. "I always wondered why someone would choose to live in Garsek instead of on the seat. They are close enough that it seems you could choose Here one. And Garsek cannot be as grand. The seat may be bigger, but that's not always a blessing, said Flip. Garsek has many benefits all its own. It is large enough to provide all of a city's finest delights, said Sylvan with a smile and a nod. Yet it is free from the intolerably arrogant folk who clog the seat like flies in a sewer. Flip laughed. Just so. And do you have a family name? And what holds you in Garsek? No family name, said Sylvan, shaking her head, and currently nothing holds me in Garsek. That is why I am here. Flip rolled his eyes and leaned back, but then before he could respond, he winced and sat back up straight, placing a hand to his chest. Excuse me. Oris's gaze sharpened. She scooted closer to him. Flip, she whispered, are you all right? Fine, he groused, just as quietly. It's the same. No pain. No better, but no worse. And it could be much worse. What is it? Said Sylvan from across the fire, frowning. Are you hurt? I'm not, said Flip shortly. It's fine. He is, said Ombi with an easygoing smile. On his chest. It must be bad. He never removes his tunic. Sylvan smirked. Not even then, said Ombi, chuckling. Mayhap it is not so painful, but only looks bad, and he is vain. I'm not, said Flip. Well, you are, for being fair, said Horace. I love these fucking idiots so much. But Sylvan's smile had left her eyes, which had narrowed slightly. When did you take the injury? Don't concern yourself with it, said Flip. Sylvan frowned. Philip. A jilted lover stabbed me, said Flip in exasperation. That's why I sought comfort in Ombi. And don't call me Philip. Kara laughed aloud. What a scandalous tale, she said. Of course it is not true. Flip glared at her. What makes you so sure? Sylvan ignored all of this so completely that she might as well not have heard it. Were you injured in the Battle of Wellmont? That stopped Flip cold. Oris, too, now stared straight at Sylvan with a razor-sharp focus. What makes you say so? Said Oris, fighting to keep her voice neutral. Oh, just a guess, said Sylvan, tilting her head. One hears many things. What things? Said Flip. You would know better than... You would know better than I, said Sylvan, smiling a little, but the lovers seemed put off by Flip's suddenly sour mood. As the day wound towards its close, they ran low on firewood. As the day wound towards its close, they ran low on firewood. Oris and Sylvan went out to gather more. The weather was not so bad under the trees, and Sylvan threw back the hood of her oiled cloak, letting the weak daylight play through her hair. They pushed a little deeper between the trunks and began to pile dead branches to carry back to the others. Sometimes, as she worked, Oris would steal glances at Sylvan, but Sylvan did not seem to notice until finally Oris spoke. How's your lip? Sylvan looked up at her in surprise. My lip? After your tussle with Flip, said Oris, tossing her head back towards the camp. It was bleeding. That drew a look of faint amusement. It has healed well. Would you like to inspect it? Oris bent towards her task again, cheeks flaming. I was only asking, and I am only answering. I've been working on another question, Oris went on slow. Why did you let Flip win? Sylvan pursed her lips. Why do you think? Oris stopped and turned to her. Just answer the question before Flip wonders what we're doing out here and comes looking for us. That drew a faint smile from Sylvan. You do love to draw straight to the point. It is admirable in its way, but so horribly dull. Let me at least give my answer in a more entertaining way. You say you have been meaning to ask me this question. That means you have been thinking about it. Tell me then, why do you think I let him win? Oris ran her hand back through her hair, brushing some of the water out of it before pulling the hood of her cloak up tighter around her. If I knew the answer, I wouldn't be asking. And I will give you the answer, but not for free. Entertain me with a guess or two first. Fine, said Oris. I think you wanted to make him feel better after you took the levers. A fair answer, said Sylvan, nodding slowly. But making him feel better, that is a what? Why would I do it? How does that help me? Oris frowned. You threw both of us off balance when you arrived, so you wanted to mollify him. You keep saying what I did, and you are correct, said Sylvan, but you do not guess at the reason, even though your question is why. So, why did I let him win? Oris chewed the inside of her cheek. Because you wanted him to trust you. No, not to trust you, because he doesn't, but to like you, I suppose. Yes, that's it, to like you. You knew you couldn't get him to trust you, not so quickly, but you could get him to like you well enough. And so he does now, said Sylvan, nodding. She had resumed gathering firewood, and now she dumped 3 more sticks on the pile. I want you both to like me. Oris folded her arms. And do you think I like you? Sylvan paused, looking over her shoulder at Oris and smiling slightly. You tell me. Oris could not help but chuckle as she stooped for another branch. You have the most infuriating way of answering questions. That is because I do not answer them at all, said Sylvan, her smile broadening. I only keep asking more questions until you discover the answer yourself. It is a trick I learned from my master. Oh, said Oris, will we find him just as irritating? More so, said Sylvan with her harsh laugh, but he is the wisest person I know. I think you will like him when you meet him, though a long road may yet stretch between us. Her voice had turned suddenly sad. I owe him my life, But she shook her head and rolled her shoulders before stooping to reach for the wood. We have been gone too long. Flip really will come after us. Oris planted a foot on the pile of wood. She waited until Sylvan looked up and met her gaze. Why do you want us to like you? She said. We've already taken your coin. Isn't that enough? What aren't you telling me? Sylvan gave her a sad smile. Many things, Oris, but at least I am honest about it. What more can you tell me? Pressed Oris. I need something. Sylvan stepped a bit closer. You said yourself that Sylvan stood straight. They were very close together. You said yourself that coin should be enough. What more do you need from me? Oris could hear her own pulse in her ears. A reason to trust you, for one thing, as well as some assurance that we won't regret taking your offer. I cannot offer you that, said Sylvan, shaking her head. Mayhap that can be your reason to trust me. You know I am hiding some truths, but I promise I will never lie to you, and so I cannot say you will be free from regret. If you come with me and meet my master, you will regret your choice many, many times. You will waver, and you may even break, but it is true, too, that you must come with me, for your sake and the sake of many others. If you do not, you will regret that even more, and your last thought before the enemy kills you will be a wish that you had come when I asked. Oris's heart was racing now. What kind of assurance is that? She asked. You paint a picture of 2 roads of darkness before me, and your only offer is that I'll regret yours a little less? I wish I had more, said Sylvan, shrugging, but I promised you no lies. No, said Oris. No, I won't do it. I won't be handed 2 awful choices and be forced to choose. I'd rather not play the game at all. Sylvan frowned, and Oris could see her fighting her own frustration. Refusing to choose is its own choice, she said. I'm sorry you do not think my reasons are enough. I've told you all I can, but you can learn the rest. Just do the one job I have hired you for. Come to Drachman and meet my master. Then you can decide if you want to take the next step, Oresiot. Gooseflesh rose all up Oris's arm and neck. If you want me to like you, you should stop using my full name. I hate it. She pushed roughly past Sylvan and stalked back off towards the camp. I love these fucking people. Emotions out of nowhere. Okay. Oh, man. I'm fine. It's fine. We're fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. But I am going to quickly throw you all into a raid. As fast as I possibly can. Yeah, alright. We're going to raid Maya Writes because she's writing. Oh. Rocking on with my bad self. I'm going to go get the rest of my day in progress. Yeah. Hey, y'all. Thanks for hanging out with me on this Sunday morning. This is the last pass through the book, and then we publish the motherfucker. Can you believe it? Wild. Absolutely wild. And we're like chunking our way through it. Like, we're doing pretty good, actually. So that's pretty dope. Anyway, I'm going to throw you over to Maya. Say hi to her for me. Wish her well. And have a good day yourself. Go out there, do what you need to do. Hope you get some writing in if it's a writing day for you. Hope you get some good rest if it's a rest day for you. And I will be back on early tomorrow morning, same bat time, same bat channel. And I will see you all then. Bye.